when ego death goes wrong. Why some spiritual awakenings become terrifying. There is a moment in some spiritual journeys described as liberation, but experienced more like psychological collapse. It begins subtly, a sense that you are not who you thought you were. Thoughts start to feel less like yours. Emotions rise and fall without explanation. The familiar inner narrator begins to fade. And then something unexpected happens. Instead of peace, there is terror. What if the ego death people talk about is not always a doorway to enlightenment, but sometimes a collapse of the mind's sense of safety itself? When the self starts to disappear. Ego death is often described in spiritual and psychedelic literature as the temporary dissolution of the self-identity, the I that organizes experience. In ideal cases, this is associated with feelings of unity, transcendence, and deep peace. But Stanislav Grof, a psychiatrist and one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, observed something more complex in his clinical work with LSD therapy in the 1960s and 70s. In his book, LSD Psychotherapy, Grof noted that ego dissolution can move through terrifying stages, which he called perinatal matrices, where individuals feel like they are dying, losing their minds, or being erased entirely. And here is the unsettling part. The mind cannot always distinguish symbolic death from literal danger. So the experience becomes not, I am dissolving into the universe, but I am ceasing to exist. That shift is where fear takes over. The brain without its anchor. Neuroscience offers a parallel explanation. Research led by Robin Carhart Harris at Imperial College London, particularly in psychedelic studies on psilocybin, shows that ego dissolution correlates with decreased activity in the default mode network, DMN, a brain system associated with self-referential thinking and identity maintenance. When the DMN quiets down, the brain loses its usual narrative structure. For some, this creates mystical unity. For others, it creates what researchers describe as acute ontological shock, the feeling that reality itself is collapsing. Carhart Harris has emphasized that context matters deeply. Without psychological readiness or emotional grounding, the same neural state that produces transcendence can also produce panic, paranoia, or existential terror. In other words, the ego does not just die. It loses its ability to interpret what is happening. And when meaning disappears faster than the nervous system can adapt, fear rushes in to fill the gap. When spiritual language becomes too big for the mind. Many spiritual traditions celebrate ego death as awakening, but clinical psychology warns that identity dissolution is not always integrated in a healthy way. Psychiatrist Rick Strassman, known for his research on DMT and author of DMT, the Spirit Molecule, reported that some participants experienced overwhelming states of disintegration, confusion, and psychological distress during high-dose sessions. While many described profound mystical experiences, others reported intense fear of annihilation. Strassman's work highlights an important distinction. A mystical experience is not automatically a stable psychological transformation. Without integration, the mind can misinterpret symbolic experiences as a literal destruction of the self. This is where spiritual awakening can turn destabilizing rather than liberating. The hidden risk, identity without structure. From a psychological perspective, the ego is not just false identity, it is also a stabilizing structure. It organizes memory, emotion, survival instincts, and social identity. When that structure dissolves too quickly, the psyche can enter a state clinicians sometimes call depersonalization, derealization state, in which individuals feel detached from themselves or reality. While this can be temporary and reversible, during the experience it can feel permanent. This is why some people describe ego death not as enlightenment, but as, I am losing my mind. Reality is fake. I no longer exist. These are not spiritual failures. They are signs of a nervous system overwhelmed by too rapid a shift in self-perception. Why some awakenings turn dark. The paradox is simple but important. The same mechanism that allows transcendence also removes psychological safety. Ego death becomes terrifying when the nervous system is not emotionally prepared. There is no grounding framework for interpretation. Fear arises before understanding can form. The experience is resisted rather than surrendered to. In such states, resistance amplifies distress. The mind tries to rebuild the ego while simultaneously experiencing its collapse, creating inner conflict that feels like a psychological rupture. Integration is the real awakening. Across both spiritual teachings and modern psychology, one conclusion repeatedly appears. The experience itself is not the final stage. Integration is. Without integration, ego death is just dissolution. With integration, it becomes transformation. This is why contemporary psychedelic researchers like Carhart Harris and clinical practitioners emphasize set and setting as well as post-experience processing. Meaning must be rebuilt slowly after the self temporarily dissolves. Because awakening is not only about losing the ego, it is about learning how to function without fear after it returns in a new form. Ego death is often spoken about as a doorway to enlightenment, but the reality is more complex. It is not just a spiritual event, it is a profound neurological and psychological shift in how identity is experienced. When it goes well, it can feel like liberation, unity, and expanded awareness. When it goes wrong, it can feel like annihilation. The difference is rarely about how spiritual someone is. It is about timing, readiness, context, and the nervous system's ability to integrate what has been revealed. In the end, ego death is not the goal. Understanding what survives it and how to rebuild from it is where the real awakening begins.